The November wind cut through the narrow streets of Brooklyn like a knife, carrying with it the scent of rain and the distant rumble of the subway beneath the cracked pavement. Streetlights flickered against the gathering darkness, casting long shadows that danced across the wet sidewalks. It was the kind of evening when most people hurried home, collars turned up against the cold, breath visible in small clouds that disappeared into the night air. But inside Trattoria Bella Vista, warmth radiated from the old brick pizza oven in the corner, and the smell of garlic, tomatoes, and fresh basil created a cocoon of comfort against the harsh world outside. The restaurant was modest, no more than 15 tables covered with red and white checkered cloths, walls decorated with faded photographs of the Italian countryside, and a small bar near the entrance where a few bottles of wine caught the amber light from overhead fixtures. It was 7:47 p.m. on a Tuesday evening. The dinner rush had passed, leaving behind a scattered handful of patrons, an elderly couple sharing a plate of pasta near the window, a young man typing furiously on his laptop while his minestrone grew cold, and two women laughing quietly over glasses of Chianti at a corner table. The atmosphere was peaceful, ordinary, safe. That was about to change. Marco Santini stood behind the kitchen door, reviewing the evening's remaining orders with the chef. At 38 years old, he had the kind of face that suggested both weariness and wisdom. Dark eyes that had seen more than most, lines around his mouth that spoke of smiles and sorrows in equal measure, and hands that bore the small scars and burns of a lifetime spent in kitchens. His black apron was slightly stained from the evening's work, his white shirt rolled up at the sleeves. He moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had served thousands of meals, taken thousands of orders, and asked thousands of times, "Is everything to your satisfaction?" He was, by all appearances, exactly what he seemed, a working man trying to make an honest living in an expensive city. "Table 7 wants extra parmesan," the chef called out in Italian, sliding a plate of spaghetti carbonara across the metal counter. "And they're asking if we have any gluten-free options." Marco nodded, making a mental note. "I'll let them know about the risotto." As he pushed through the kitchen door, balancing 3 plates with the ease of long practice, he didn't notice the sudden shift in the restaurant's energy. But the hostess did. Maria, a 19-year-old college student working part-time, stood frozen at her podium near the entrance, her hand hovering over the reservation book. Her face had gone pale, and her eyes were fixed on the door. The elderly couple stopped eating mid-bite. The young man's fingers stilled on his keyboard. The two women's laughter died in their throats. Everyone in Trattoria Bella Vista was now looking at the entrance, and the expression on every face was identical. Fear. Isabella Romano had arrived. She stood in the doorway for a moment, allowing the cold air to swirl around her like a cape, surveying the restaurant with the calm assessment of a predator evaluating territory. At 29 years old, she possessed the kind of beauty that made people uncomfortable, not because it was flawed, but because it was too perfect, too controlled, too deliberate. Everything about her was calculated. The way her dark hair fell in precise waves over her shoulders, the cut of her black cashmere coat that cost more than most people's monthly rent, the diamond studs in her ears that caught the light with cold brilliance, the Louboutin heels that clicked against the floor with the rhythm of a countdown. But it was her eyes that truly unsettled people. They were dark, almost black, and they registered everything while revealing nothing. They were eyes that had watched empires rise and fall, eyes that had made decisions most people couldn't imagine, eyes that saw the world not as it was, but as a chessboard where everyone else was merely a piece to be moved or removed. Behind her, two men entered. They were large, broad-shouldered, wearing expensive suits that couldn't quite hide their true purpose. They didn't need to do anything threatening. Their mere presence was threat enough. They positioned themselves near the door, hands clasped in front of them, eyes scanning the restaurant with professional vigilance. Isabella didn't acknowledge them. She didn't need to. The hostess, Maria, finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Good evening, Ms. Romano. Your usual table?" Isabella's gaze shifted to the young woman, and for a moment, something that might have been amusement flickered in those dark eyes. "Yes, Maria, my usual table." "Unless someone is sitting there?" "No, no, of course not. It's ready for you." Maria grabbed a menu with trembling hands, nearly dropping it twice. The corner table in the back, the one with a clear view of both the entrance and the kitchen, the one where no one could approach from behind, the one that had somehow remained mysteriously unreserved every Tuesday evening for the past 6 months, waited like a throne. As Isabella moved through the restaurant, something remarkable happened. The elderly couple suddenly became very interested in their plates. The young man closed his laptop and stared at the table. The two women stopped talking entirely, their wine glasses frozen halfway to their lips. No one made eye contact. No one spoke. The only sounds were the soft click of Isabella's heels against the tile floor and the muted clatter from the kitchen. Power, true power, doesn't need to announce itself. It simply exists, changing the air pressure in a room, making people's instincts scream warnings that their rational minds struggle to understand. Isabella reached her table and removed her coat with a fluid motion, revealing a black silk blouse and tailored pants. She sat with her back to the wall, arranged her phone and a small designer purse on the table with precise placement, and finally looked up at Maria, who stood there clutching the menu like a life preserver. "Water." Still, not sparkling. "Room temperature. And bring me tonight's specials." Isabella's voice was low, controlled, with the faintest trace of a New York accent wrapped around perfectly pronounced English. There was no please, no thank you. Commands didn't require courtesy. "Yes, Ms. Romano, right away." Maria practically fled back to the hostess stand. One of the bodyguards moved to a nearby table, positioning himself where he could watch both Isabella and the entrance. The other remained at the door. This was routine. This was every Tuesday evening for the past 6 months. In the kitchen, Marco had just returned from delivering his 3 plates. He was wiping his hands on his apron when Luis, one of the other waiters, grabbed his arm. "She's here," Luis whispered urgently in Spanish. His face was tight with anxiety. Who's here? Romano, Isabella Romano, at table 12. Marco's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Something quick and calculating that disappeared almost before it appeared. And? Marco, everyone knows who she is. Everyone knows what. Louis stopped himself, glancing toward the chef, who was pointedly ignoring their conversation. Just be careful, okay? Don't say anything stupid. Don't do anything that might upset her. Marco patted Luis's shoulder. I'll be fine. It's just another customer. But they both knew that wasn't true. Marco took a moment to compose himself, checking his reflection in the stainless steel of the refrigerator. He smoothed down his apron, rolled his shoulders back, and picked up a small notepad and pen. Then he pushed through the kitchen door into the dining room. The walk from the kitchen to table 12 took approximately 20 seconds. In those 20 seconds, Marco's mind was completely clear. He had waited 13 years for this moment. "13 years of searching, of working in restaurants across 3 states, of following whispers and rumors, of tracking the movements of a woman who had become a ghost to her mother's memory. 13 years of carrying a promise that weighed heavier with each passing day. And now, finally, she was sitting 15 feet away, studying a menu as if she were just another person looking for a good meal. Isabella didn't look up when Marco approached the table. This was also routine. Make people wait, establish the hierarchy, remind them of their place before the conversation even begins. "Good evening," Marco said in English, his voice carrying the heavy accent of someone for whom the language was learned, not native. "I am Marco. I will be your server tonight. Can I—" He paused, searching for the word. "Can I start you with something to drink? Or maybe appetizer?" Still, Isabella didn't look up. She turned a page in the menu, her perfectly manicured nails catching the light. Marco waited. 10 seconds, 20 seconds. This, too, was a test. Finally, Isabella closed the menu and lifted her eyes to him. The full force of her gaze was like standing in front of a spotlight, exposing, harsh, unforgiving. "Tell me," she said slowly, "do you actually speak Italian, or do you just pretend for the tourists?" Her tone wasn't curious. It was challenging, mocking. Marco kept his expression neutral. "I speak some Italian, yes. I learn when I work in restaurants. Is not perfect, but—" "Try," Isabella interrupted, switching to Italian. Her Italian was flawless, crisp, carrying the refined accent of someone who had been educated in the language from childhood. "Tell me the specials in Italian. Let's see how much you actually know." The bodyguard at the nearby table shifted slightly, his attention now fully on the interaction. The other diners, though pretending not to watch, were listening to every word. Marco cleared his throat, then began in halting, heavily accented Italian. "Tonight we have osso buco con risotto, the veal shank with the rice, and also we have branzino al forno. The fish is baked with herbs and the lemon." He was deliberately mangling the pronunciation, putting emphasis on wrong syllables, treating Italian like it was a puzzle he was trying to solve rather than a language he understood. Isabella's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "The fish with the lemon?" She repeated his words in a mocking tone, exaggerating his mistakes. "And tell me, this risotto, is it the rice or is it actually risotto?" A soft laugh escaped her throat, cold and sharp. The bodyguard's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close enough. Marco's face flushed slightly. I am sorry. My Italian is not so good. I try to—" "You try?" Isabella leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a tone that somehow carried more weight than if she'd shouted. "You work in an Italian restaurant? You're supposed to serve Italian food and you can barely speak the language? That's embarrassing." "Tell me, how long have you been in America? 10 years? 20? And you still sound like you just stepped off the boat." 7 years, Marco said quietly, maintaining his humble posture, eyes downcast. "I am from—" "I don't care where you're from," Isabella interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "What I care about is whether you can take my order without butchering one of the world's most beautiful languages. It's offensive, really." Like watching someone scratch their nails on a chalkboard. She leaned back in her chair, studying him with the detached interest of someone examining an insect. "Try again. Tell me about the branzino. Use complete sentences. Let's see if we can get through this without me losing my appetite." The restaurant had fallen completely silent. Even the soft background music seemed to have faded away. Everyone was watching now, not even pretending otherwise. This was a public humiliation, and they were all witnesses. Marco's hands tightened around his notepad, but his voice remained steady. "The branzino is very fresh. It come this morning from the market. We prepare with rosemary and aglio." "Aglio?" Isabella's eyebrows rose in exaggerated surprise. "Oh, you know the word for garlic. How impressive." "What else? Does it come with the vegetables? Maybe the potatoes?" Her bodyguard chuckled, a low sound that made several diners flinch. Marco took a breath, about to respond, when Isabella held up her hand again. "You know what? Never mind. I've heard enough. Just bring me the branzino and a caprese salad to start. And please, when you bring my food, don't try to speak Italian. Stick to English. It's less painful for everyone." She picked up her phone, a clear dismissal. The conversation was over. Marco was supposed to nod, apologize again, and retreat to the kitchen with his dignity in tatters. That was the script. That was how these interactions always ended. But Marco didn't move. Instead, he stood there for a moment longer, his head still slightly bowed. The silence stretched. Isabella's fingers paused over her phone screen, a flicker of irritation crossing her features. "Was there something else?" she asked without looking up, her voice cold. "Or do you need me to write down my order?" Marco slowly lifted his head. When he spoke again, everything changed. "O pesce è frisce como a mattina," he said quietly, his voice suddenly transformed. "Navarca l'hapighiatu da umare, endo usuli si spuntan quadru. Sapurica recordanu a casa. Stucorica cerca sempre da endo enatu. The words rolled out in perfect Calabrese dialect. Not the standardized Italian taught in schools or spoken in Rome, but the specific, intimate, ancient way of speaking from a tiny village perched in the mountains of southern Italy. Monte Giordano. A place so small that most Italians had never heard of it, where fewer than 3,000 people lived, where the dialect was passed down through generations like a secret code. The dialect Isabella's mother had spoken. The dialect Isabella's grandmother had whispered while braiding her hair. The dialect that was supposed to be known only to people from that impossibly small corner of the world. And the words he'd chosen. The fish is fresh like the morning. A boat caught it from the sea where the sun rises over the mountain. Flavors that remember home. This heart that always seeks where it was born. It was something Isabella's grandmother used to say about cooking. About remembering. About home. Isabella's hand froze completely. Her phone slipped slightly in her grip, nearly falling to the table. Her eyes, which had been dismissive and cold, suddenly went wide. All the carefully maintained control, the calculated composure, the armor she wore, it cracked. Her face went pale. Her breath caught in her throat in a way that was audible in the silent restaurant. The bodyguard at the nearby table immediately tensed, his hand moving toward his jacket. Not because Marco had done anything threatening, but because Isabella's reaction was so profound, so completely unexpected, that years of training screamed that something was wrong. Marco held her gaze now, his own eyes no longer humble or subservient. They were steady, knowing, carrying depths that hadn't been visible before. He'd dropped the mask of the struggling immigrant waiter, and what remained was something else entirely. Someone who knew exactly what those words would do, who understood precisely what memories they would unlock. U branzino e como ti ricordi, Marco continued softly, still in that impossible dialect. Preparatu como a nonna facia in tui du paese, quando u tempo era menu pesanti, quando u cori era ciu ligero. The branzino is like you remember. Prepared like grandmother used to make in the village, when time was less heavy, when the heart was lighter. The air itself seemed to have solidified. The other diners didn't understand the words, but they understood that something monumental was happening at table 12. The elderly couple sat frozen, forks halfway to their mouths. The young man's eyes were wide. The two women leaned forward unconsciously. Isabella's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her hand went to her throat, a gesture so unconscious, so vulnerable, so unlike her that it was more shocking than if she'd drawn a weapon. Memories flooded back in violent waves, her mother's voice singing lullabies in that exact dialect, her grandmother's hands making pasta in the tiny kitchen of their village home, the smell of tomatoes growing in the garden, the sound of church bells echoing off stone walls. Her mother's face, young and smiling, before America, before the darkness, before everything changed. And one memory above all. Her mother's voice, in that exact dialect. The last conversation they'd had before the accident that wasn't an accident. Nun ti scordari indoveni piccirida mia, usangu nun si cancia mai ucori poshigeri. Don't forget where you come from, my little one. Blood doesn't change, but the heart can choose. Isabella's hand was trembling. Visibly trembling. Something that hadn't happened in years. Something she thought she'd trained out of herself through sheer force of will. Who? Her voice came out as barely a whisper, cracking on the single syllable. She had to stop, clear her throat, try again. Who are you? Marco didn't answer immediately. He stood there, tall and calm, meeting her gaze with an expression that was neither hostile nor friendly, simply present, simply waiting. I am Marco, he said finally, in English now, his accent mysteriously lighter than it had been moments before. I am your waiter this evening. I will bring your caprese salad and your branzino. He paused, and the slightest hint of something, sadness, regret, purpose, crossed his features. And perhaps, when you are ready, we can talk about Monte Giordano, about your mother's village, about the promises we make to the people we love. He turned to leave, but Isabella's voice stopped him, sharp, commanding, though still shaken. Wait. Marco paused, half-turned back toward her. Isabella's composure was rapidly rebuilding itself, her training reasserting control. But her eyes were still storm-tossed, still searching, still afraid in a way that power and money couldn't protect against. How do you know that dialect? Each word was carefully measured. Who told you about my mother? Your food will be ready soon, Marco said simply. Please, enjoy your evening, Ms. Romano. And then he walked away, back toward the kitchen, leaving Isabella sitting at her table with her phone forgotten, her careful mask shattered, and 1,000 questions screaming in her mind. The bodyguard at the nearby table looked at her, uncertain. This had never happened before. Isabella never looked uncertain. Isabella never trembled. Isabella never showed fear. She made a small gesture with her hand, a signal he recognized. Stay calm. Stay in position. But her eyes told a different story. They were locked on the kitchen door where Marco had disappeared, and in them was a war between fury and fear, between the need to know and the terror of what she might discover. Around them, the restaurant slowly began to breathe again. Forks moved, quiet conversations resumed. But everyone in Trattoria Bella Vista knew they'd witnessed something extraordinary. They just didn't understand what. Isabella sat motionless at her table, her mind racing through possibilities, through memories, through dangers. That dialect was her family's most intimate secret. Her mother had never taught it to anyone outside the family. Her grandmother had forbidden them from speaking it in public in America. It was a thread connecting her to a past she'd tried to bury, a past that was supposed to be dead and gone. So how did a waiter, a random, ordinary waiter in a modest Brooklyn restaurant, know it? Not just know it, but speak it perfectly, with the exact inflections and idioms that her grandmother had used? Coincidence? Impossible. Someone sent him? But who? Who even knew about the dialect? Who would know its significance? Her mother? No. Her mother was 13 years dead, buried in a cemetery in New Jersey under a stone that bore lies about how she died. Unless... Isabella's hand moved slowly across the table to her phone. She unlocked it with a shaking finger and typed a message with uncharacteristic slowness. Find out everything about the waiter at Bella Vista. Marco, last name unknown. Everything. Family, history, where he came from, who he knows. I want a full report in 1 hour. She hit send and placed the phone back on the table. Then she sat there, alone with her thoughts and her memories, while the November cold pressed against the windows and the old photographs of Italy on the walls seemed to watch her with knowing eyes. In the kitchen, Marco stood at the counter, his hands steady as he prepared the caprese salad, arranging mozzarella and tomatoes with careful precision. The chef watched him curiously but said nothing. Luis stayed far away, sensing that whatever had just happened was beyond his understanding. Marco's face was calm, but his eyes held the weight of 13 years. 13 years of waiting. 13 years of preparing for this exact moment. The promise he'd made to a dying woman in a hospital room. A woman with dark hair and kind eyes who had gripped his hand and whispered, "Find my daughter. Tell her the truth. Tell her she doesn't have to be what they made her." The first move had been made. Now, everything would change. The penthouse stood 63 floors above Manhattan, a glass and steel fortress where the noise of the city became nothing more than a distant hum. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, the skyline stretched out in every direction, a constellation of lights that never truly slept, a monument to power and ambition and the relentless forward march of human desire. But Isabella Romano wasn't looking at the view. She stood in the center of her living room at 2:47 a.m., still wearing the black silk blouse and tailored pants from the restaurant, though she'd kicked off her Louboutin heels hours ago. Her feet were bare against the cold marble floor, and she welcomed the discomfort. It helped keep her grounded, helped keep her mind sharp when everything inside her felt like it was spinning out of control. The penthouse was exactly what one would expect from someone in her position. Minimalist furniture in blacks and grays, abstract art on the walls that cost more than most people's houses, a kitchen with appliances she never used, a bar stocked with bottles she rarely opened. Everything was perfect. Everything was controlled. Everything was exactly as it should be. Except for the small wooden box sitting on her glass coffee table. Isabella had retrieved it from the back of her closet around midnight, after hours of pacing and thinking and trying to make sense of what had happened at the restaurant. She hadn't opened this box in 5 years. Hadn't wanted to. Hadn't needed to. But now she sat down on her cream-colored sofa, pulled the box toward her, and with trembling fingers, fingers that had signed documents worth millions, that had made decisions that altered lives, that never, ever trembled, she lifted the lid. Inside were photographs. The first one showed a little girl, perhaps 6 years old, with wild dark curls and a gap-toothed smile. She was sitting on a stone wall with mountains rising behind her, holding a slice of watermelon bigger than her head. Her eyes sparkled with uncomplicated joy. Isabella stared at that little girl and barely recognized herself. The second photograph showed a woman in her early 30s with the same dark hair, the same eyes, but carrying a weight in her expression that the little girl didn't yet understand. She was standing in a kitchen, not this sterile Manhattan kitchen, but a warm, cramped kitchen with yellow walls and herbs hanging from the ceiling, stirring something in a large pot. She was looking over her shoulder at the camera, and her smile was both beautiful and sad. Maria Lucia Romano, Isabella's mother. Dead 13 years. Isabella's hand moved to touch the photograph, her finger tracing the outline of her mother's face. The memories came whether she wanted them or not. Flashback. 23 years ago. Montegiordano, Calabria, Italy. Vieni, cha, piccirida mia, aiutami con esta salsa. 6-year-old Isabella ran into the kitchen, her bare feet slapping against the tile floor. Outside, the August sun beat down on the village, making the stones too hot to touch and sending everyone indoors during the afternoon hours. But inside her grandmother's kitchen, it was cool and filled with the smell of tomatoes cooking down with basil and garlic. Cosa facciamo, Mama? Little Isabella tried to peek into the pot, standing on her tiptoes. Her mother laughed. A sound like bells, like music, like everything good in the world, and lifted her daughter up to sit on the counter. Facemu a salsa como a nonna tahavi insegnatu. Ti ricordi? We're making sauce like Nonna taught us, I remember. Maria Romano wiped her hands on her apron and cupped her daughter's face. Ma ricordati, when we talk in the kitchen, we speak como a familia. You understand? Stu dialettu e sulu nostru. E u secretu caniteni uniti. This dialect is only ours, Isabella repeated carefully, her child's tongue wrapping around the unfamiliar sounds. It's the secret that keeps us together. Brava, tesoro mio. Her mother kissed her forehead. In America, we will speak English. In school, you will learn proper Italian. But here, in our home, in our hearts, we speak like our grandmothers and their grandmothers. Capisti? Capisti, Mama. But even at 6 years old, Isabella could see the shadow that crossed her mother's face when she said America. Could feel the way her mother's hands tightened slightly when she mentioned leaving. Mama, why do we have to go to America? Maria Romano was quiet for a moment, stirring the sauce with slow, deliberate movements. Because your father says we must. Because there are opportunities there. Because life here is difficult. But I like it here. I like Nonna's house. I like the mountains. I know, amore mio, I know. Her mother's voice carried a sadness that 6-year-old Isabella couldn't fully comprehend. But sometimes we must do things we don't want to do. Sometimes we must go places we don't want to go. Sometimes... She stopped herself, shook her head. Someday you'll understand. Just promise me something. What, Mama? Promise me you'll never forget this place. Never forget this language. Never forget who you really are, no matter what happens, no matter what anyone tells you to become. Her mother's eyes were suddenly intense, urgent. Promise me, Isabella. I promise, Mama. But it was a promise that a 6-year-old couldn't fully understand. A promise whose weight would only become clear years later, when it was too late. Present, 2:53 a.m., Manhattan penthouse. Isabella blinked, pulled forcefully back to the present by the vibration of her phone on the glass table. She set down the photograph and picked up the device, her professional mask sliding back into place even though she was alone. A text message from Marcus, her head of security. Full report ready. Sending encrypted file now. 30 seconds later, her phone chimed again. Isabella opened the encrypted file and began to read. Subject: Marco Santini, age 38. Current residence: Queens, NY, address included. Employment: Trattoria, Bella Vista, 2 years. Previously, various restaurants in New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia. Immigration status: U.S. citizen, naturalized 2019. Originally from Italy, criminal record. Non-financial status: modest income, no significant assets, no debt family, no immediate family in the U.S. Parents deceased, father 2008, mother 2015. Both in Italy. Education: high school equivalent in Italy, no college social media, minimal presence, no notable connections. Known associates, restaurant coworkers, landlord, few social connections. The report went on for several pages, detailing Marco's work history, his apartment lease agreements, his bank statements, even his grocery shopping habits. On paper, he was exactly what he appeared to be, an ordinary man living an ordinary life, working in restaurants to make ends meet. But Isabella knew better. Ordinary men didn't speak the Monte Giordano dialect. Ordinary men didn't know her family's most intimate secrets. She scrolled to the section about his origins in Italy. Place of birth: Monte Giordano, Calabria, Italy. There it was. The connection. He was from her mother's village. But the village was small, maybe 3,000 people. How old would Marco have been when her mother left? She did the math quickly. He would have been 13 when she and her mother moved to America. Old enough to remember. Old enough to have known her mother. But why would her mother have confided in a teenage boy? And why would he wait 13 years after her death to reveal himself? Isabella's mind worked through possibilities like a chess player analyzing a board. Each scenario led to more questions. Each answer spawned 3 new mysteries. She looked at the accompanying photographs in the report, surveillance images taken that evening after she'd left the restaurant. Marco walking to the subway. Marco entering a modest apartment building in Queens. Marco's face in profile, serious and thoughtful. There was something about his eyes in these photos, something that suggested depths the report couldn't capture. Isabella stood abruptly, unable to sit still any longer. She walked to the windows, pressing her palm against the cold glass. Below, the city pulsed with life even at this hour. Somewhere down there, people were living normal lives, falling in love, raising children, working ordinary jobs, dreaming small dreams. She had given up that possibility a long time ago. Flashback, 13 years ago. New Jersey. 16-year-old Isabella stood in the hospital corridor, her school uniform rumpled, her face streaked with tears. Through the small window in the door, she could see her mother lying in the hospital bed, pale and still, connected to machines that beeped with artificial rhythm. Her father stood beside her, his hand heavy on her shoulder. Dante Romano, a man whose very name carried weight in certain circles, whose business interests were diverse and rarely discussed, whose friends and enemies all treated him with carefully calculated respect. "They're saying it was an accident," her father said quietly, his voice thick with an emotion Isabella couldn't quite identify. Grief? Or something else? The brakes failed. She went off the road near the warehouse district. Isabella wiped her eyes. "Can I see her?" "The doctors say she's stable, but—" He paused. "Isabella, you need to understand something. Your mother, she was talking about leaving, about taking you away, about starting over somewhere far from here." Isabella looked up at her father, confused. "What? Why would she—" "Because she never understood," Dante continued, his voice hardening. "She never understood that this life, our life, it's not something you just walk away from. It's not something you escape. It's family. It's blood. It's who we are." "Papa, I don't understand what you're—" "You will." His grip on her shoulder tightened. "Your mother wanted you to be soft, to be normal." "To live some fantasy life where our family history doesn't matter. But that's not reality, Isabella. Reality is that you're a Romano. And Romanos don't run. Romanos don't hide. Romanos face the world with strength." 16-year-old Isabella didn't fully grasp what her father was telling her, didn't understand the implications, didn't realize that this moment, this conversation in a sterile hospital corridor, was the moment when her fate was being sealed. 3 days later, her mother was dead. The doctor said complications, unexpected decline. "So sorry for your loss." Isabella cried at the funeral, cried until she had no tears left, cried until her father told her that tears were weakness, that Romanos didn't show weakness, that she needed to be strong now. So she stopped crying. She learned to be strong, learned to be hard, learned to be exactly what her father needed her to be. She forgot her mother's warnings, forgot the promises she'd made in that kitchen in Monte Giordano. Forgot the dialect, the village, the girl she'd once been. Or at least, she thought she had. Present. 3:42 a.m., Manhattan penthouse. Isabella realized she'd been standing at the window for nearly an hour, lost in memories. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east. Not quite dawn, but the promise of it. She made a decision. 20 minutes later, she was dressed in dark jeans, a simple black sweater, and flat boots. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. No jewelry, no designer labels. She looked, for all intents and purposes, like any other young woman in New York. She left her penthouse through the private elevator, bypassing the doorman by using the service entrance, and walked 3 blocks before hailing a cab. Old habits. When you didn't want to be followed, you made it difficult. "Brooklyn," she told the driver. I'll give you the exact address when we get closer. The city passed by outside the cab window, still alive, still moving, transitioning from the desperate energy of night to the determined energy of early morning. Delivery trucks, street cleaners, insomniacs, and early risers. The invisible machinery that kept New York functioning. Isabella arrived at Trattoria Bella Vista at 4:37 a.m. The restaurant was dark, closed, the chairs stacked on tables visible through the windows. She'd known it would be closed. That wasn't why she was here. She stood across the street, hidden in the shadows of a doorway, and waited. At 5:15 a.m., a figure approached the restaurant from the opposite direction. Marco Santini, carrying a messenger bag, wearing jeans and a jacket, moving with the tired determination of someone about to start a long day. He unlocked the restaurant's service entrance and disappeared inside. Isabella waited 5 minutes, then 10, making sure he was alone, making sure no one else was coming. Then she crossed the street and tried the door. It was unlocked. Inside, the restaurant was dim, lit only by the emerging dawn through the windows and a light from the kitchen. She could hear sounds, water running, pans clattering, someone moving around. She walked through the dining room, her footsteps silent, moving toward the kitchen with the careful precision of someone who had learned long ago how to enter spaces unnoticed. She pushed open the kitchen door. Marco was standing at a prep station, chopping onions with methodical efficiency. He didn't look up when she entered, though she knew, absolutely knew, that he'd heard her. "The restaurant doesn't open until 11, he said calmly, still focused on his chopping. "But if you're hungry, I can make you an espresso. The machine takes a few minutes to warm up." Isabella closed the door behind her. The kitchen suddenly felt very small, very contained. Just the two of them and too many questions. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low and controlled. "About the branzino? Was it not cooked to your satisfaction?" Marco set down his knife and finally looked at her. His eyes showed no surprise. He'd been expecting her. "About my mother?" Isabella moved closer, each step deliberate. "About Monte Giordano, about how you know things you shouldn't know." Marco wiped his hands on a towel, considering her. "Would you like to sit? I can make that espresso." "I don't want espresso." "I want answers." The two aren't mutually exclusive. He moved to the espresso machine, beginning the process of preparing coffee with the same methodical care he'd shown with the onions. But answers, real answers, take time. They require context. They can't be rushed. Isabella felt her patience, already thread-thin after a sleepless night, beginning to fray. "I've had you investigated. You're from Monte Giordano. You're the right age to have known my mother." "But that still doesn't explain how you know the dialect, how you know family phrases, how you found me." "All true." Marco was grinding coffee beans now, the sound loud in the quiet kitchen. "And all questions that deserve answers. But first, tell me, when was the last time you spoke your mother's dialect? Really spoke it, not just remembered it?" The question caught Isabella off guard. She opened her mouth to respond, then realized she didn't have an answer. 13 years? Marco suggested gently. Since your mother's passing? How did you? Isabella stopped herself. You seem to know a lot about my family, about me. Your mother told me about you, near the end. Marco poured water into the espresso machine, his movements precise. She talked about you constantly, about who you were as a child, about who she hoped you would become, about who she feared you were turning into. The words hit Isabella like physical blows. My mother died in a car accident. Brake failure. She was alone. Is that what you were told? Marco's eyes met hers, and in them she saw something that made her blood run cold. Pity. Is that what you still believe? Isabella's hand moved instinctively toward her waist, where she usually kept a concealed weapon. But she'd left it at home. She was unarmed, vulnerable. And this man, this waiter who knew too much, was looking at her with an expression that suggested he knew exactly what she'd been reaching for. My mother's death was investigated, Isabella said, her voice hard. It was an accident. Accidents can be arranged. Marco finished preparing 2 small cups of espresso and set them on the counter. Your mother knew she was in danger. She'd been talking about leaving, about taking you somewhere your father couldn't find you. She'd made plans. That's a lie. My mother loved my father. Your mother feared your father. Marco's voice was gentle but firm. She loved you. Everything she did, every risk she took, every plan she made, was for you. Isabella felt the walls of the kitchen closing in. This couldn't be true. Her father, despite everything, despite the business, despite the reputation, had grieved for her mother, had mourned genuinely. Hadn't he? Why should I believe anything you say? Isabella demanded. You're a stranger. A waiter who speaks a dialect and tells stories. That's not proof. That's not... Your mother gave me something. Marco interrupted quietly. Something she said you would recognize. Something that would prove I'm telling the truth. He reached into his messenger bag and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. Isabella's breath caught. Even wrapped, she recognized the shape, the size. It couldn't be. Marco carefully unwrapped the cloth, revealing a small ceramic dove, hand-painted in blue and white, no bigger than a fist. One wing was slightly chipped. The base had a small crack that had been carefully repaired. No, Isabella whispered. Your grandmother made this, Marco said softly. In Monte Giordano. She gave it to your mother on her wedding day. Your mother kept it on her nightstand. She said it reminded her of home, of who she really was. Isabella stared at the dove. She remembered it. God help her. She remembered it. She remembered being 7 years old, playing in her parents' bedroom, accidentally knocking it off the nightstand. She remembered the crack. Remembered her mother carefully gluing it back together, saying it was okay, accidents happen. The important thing was that they fixed it together. That dove had disappeared after her mother died. Isabella had assumed it had been lost, thrown away, forgotten. But here it was, in the hands of a stranger. Proof that everything he was saying might be true. How did you... Isabella's voice cracked. She cleared her throat, tried again. How did you get this? Your mother gave it to me. 3 days before she died. She was afraid. She said if anything happened to her, when something happened to her because she knew it was coming, I should find you. I should tell you the truth. I should show you this, so you would know she never stopped trying to save you. Isabella reached out with shaking hands and took the ceramic dove. It was cool to the touch, familiar, carrying the weight of 1,000 memories. She asked me to wait, Marco continued, watching her carefully. She said you would need time. Years, probably. Time to become who you needed to become. Time to see the life clearly. Time to be ready to hear the truth. She made me promise I wouldn't approach you until the time was right. And you decided that time is now? Isabella's voice was barely above a whisper. I've been watching, waiting. You've been coming to this restaurant every Tuesday for 6 months, always alone, always sitting at the same table, always looking like you're trying to remember something, or forget something, or maybe both. Marco's expression was sad. Your mother said I would know when you were ready, that I would see it in your eyes. And last night when you walked in, I saw it. You're tired, Isabella. Tired of being someone you're not. Isabella wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, wanted to walk out of this kitchen and pretend this conversation never happened. But she couldn't. Because somewhere deep inside, beneath the armor and the training and the years of carefully constructed identity, a small voice was whispering that he was right. She was tired. Prove it, she said finally, her voice regaining some of its strength. Prove she knew. Prove she told you these things. The dove could have been stolen. You could have learned the dialect. You could be Usangunun si kansia, ma'u koripo shigiri, Marco said quietly. Blood doesn't change, but the heart can choose. Your mother said you would remember that. She said it was the last thing she told you before the accident, the last real conversation you had. Isabella's legs went weak. She grabbed the prep counter for support. Those words, those exact words. Her mother had said them the night before the accident, a night Isabella had replayed in her mind 1,000 times, trying to understand what her mother had meant, why she'd seemed so sad, why she'd held Isabella so tightly when they said goodnight. No one knew about that conversation. No one could know, unless her mother had told them. She wanted you to have choices, Marco continued. She wanted you to know that being born into this life doesn't mean you have to stay in it. That you can choose something different, something better. There is no getting out, Isabella said automatically, the words her father had drilled into her for years. This life, it's who I am. It's what I am. Is it? Marco challenged gently. Or is it what you were taught to believe? What you were shaped into after your mother could no longer protect you? Isabella looked down at the ceramic dove in her hands. Such a small thing, such an insignificant object. But it carried the weight of everything she'd lost, everything she'd forgotten, everything she'd been forced to become. Why now? She asked. Why? After 13 years, are you telling me this now? Because your mother was right. You weren't ready before. But you are now. I can see it. You're starting to question, starting to wonder if there's another way. Marco paused. And because time is running out. What do you mean? Marco's expression darkened. You have enemies, Isabella. People who are tired of your success. People who remember that you're Dante Romano's daughter and they haven't forgotten what happened to him. They're planning something, moving against you. I've heard whispers. I can handle my enemies. Maybe. Probably. But your mother didn't save this. He gestured to the dove. And trust me to find you just so you could fight one more battle. She wanted you to have a choice, a way out, a chance at the life she never got to give you. Isabella was quiet for a long moment. The espresso Marco had made sat forgotten on the counter, going cold. Outside, the sun was fully up now, painting the kitchen in golden light through the high windows. I don't know you, Isabella said finally. I don't know if I can trust you. And even if everything you're saying is true, even if my mother really did confide in you, I can't just walk away from my life. It's not that simple. I know. Marco nodded. Your mother knew it wouldn't be simple. That's why she made plans, set things aside, created options for you. What kind of options? That's a conversation for another time, when you're ready, when you've had time to think about what I've told you. Marco picked up his knife, returned to his prep work. But know this, Isabella Romano, you have a choice. You've always had a choice. Your mother made sure of that. Isabella stood there for another minute, the ceramic dove still in her hands, her mind reeling with implications and possibilities and memories. Finally, she wrapped the dove carefully back in its cloth and tucked it into her jacket. I'm leaving, she said, but I'll be back. I know, Marco said without looking up from his chopping. Tuesday, your usual table. 7:45 p.m. I'll be here. Isabella walked to the kitchen door, then paused with her hand on the handle. Marco? Yes? If you're lying to me, if any of this is some elaborate scheme, you won't live to regret it. Marco looked up then, meeting her eyes directly. And if I'm telling you the truth, what then? Isabella didn't have an answer for that. So she left, walking back through the empty restaurant, out into the morning light of Brooklyn, where the world was waking up and life was continuing and everything looked the same, even though she felt fundamentally changed. She hailed a cab back to Manhattan, clutching the ceramic dove in her pocket like a lifeline or an anchor. She wasn't sure which. By the time she reached her penthouse, her phone had 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Business. Always business. Decisions that needed to be made. Problems that needed solving. The endless machinery of power that never stopped, never rested, never gave her a moment to breathe. She ignored all of it. Instead, she sat on her sofa, unwrapped the ceramic dove, and placed it carefully on her coffee table next to the box of photographs. Then Isabella Romano, feared and respected, powerful and untouchable, put her head in her hands and cried for the first time in 13 years. Outside, Manhattan continued its relentless pace. But inside that penthouse, time seemed to stop. And in a modest kitchen in Brooklyn, a man who'd carried a promise for 13 years finally allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he'd fulfilled it. The choice now belonged to Isabella. Everything that came next would depend on what she decided to do with it. The following Tuesday arrived wrapped in cold rain. November in New York had turned harsh, with wind that cut through coats and left the streets shining like black mirrors under the streetlights. Isabella sat in her car across from Trattoria Bella Vista, watching water stream down the windshield. She'd been there for 20 minutes, her hand resting on the concealed weapon beneath her jacket, her mind racing through scenarios and contingencies. She'd spent the week investigating Marco from every angle. Her people had dug deeper, talked to his neighbors, his former employers, checked immigration records going back decades. Everything confirmed what the first report had said. He was exactly who he appeared to be, a man from Monte Giordano who'd come to America and worked honest jobs. But that only made the mystery deeper. Why would her mother trust an ordinary man with her deepest secrets? What connection had they shared? Isabella checked her watch. 7:43 p.m. Time to find out. She crossed the street through the rain, pushed open the restaurant door, and stepped into the familiar warmth. The dinner crowd was modest on this rainy Tuesday. A few couples, a family with young children, an elderly man reading a newspaper at the bar. Marco was serving table 9. When he saw her enter, he simply nodded toward her usual table in the corner, already set, already waiting, as if he'd known she would come. Isabella sat down, her back to the wall, her hand still near her weapon. She waited. Marco finished with his other table, then approached with that same calm demeanor, carrying a glass of water. He set it down carefully. Buonasera, Ms. Romano. We need to talk, Isabella said quietly. Somewhere private. Marco glanced around the restaurant. The kitchen. After we close. Can you wait an hour? Isabella wanted to demand answers now, immediately, but she forced herself to nod. I'll wait. Your usual, the branzino? I'm not here to eat, Marco. Nevertheless. He smiled slightly. You should eat. What comes next will require strength. Before she could respond, he walked away, leaving her alone with her thoughts and her growing apprehension. The hour passed slowly. Isabella sat at her table, barely touching the food Marco eventually brought her. She watched him work, moving between tables with practiced ease, speaking to customers with genuine warmth, completely ordinary and yet completely mysterious. Finally, at 9:15 p.m., the last customers left. The other staff cleaned up quickly and departed, leaving the restaurant empty except for Isabella and Marco. He locked the front door, turned the sign to closed, and gestured toward the kitchen. Isabella followed him, her hand instinctively moving toward her weapon as they entered the private space. The kitchen was clean and quiet, lit only by overhead fluorescents that hummed softly. Marco turned to face her, and for the first time since this began, she saw genuine emotion in his eyes, a mixture of sadness and resolve. Before we begin, he said quietly, I need to tell you something. Your mother and I, we were friends. Just friends. But she trusted me with her life, and more importantly, with yours. How did you know her? Isabella demanded. You were a kid when she left Italy. I was 13. old enough to understand that Maria Romano was different from the other women in the village. She was kind to me when others weren't. My family was poor. We had nothing. Your mother used to bring food to our house, pretend she'd made too much and didn't want it to go to waste. Marco's voice carried the weight of old memories. She saw me, really saw me, not as a poor kid from a struggling family, but as a person. Isabella listened, her guard still up, but beginning to understand. When she left for America, she promised to write. And she did, for years. She told me about you, about your father, about how the life was changing her. The letters became darker over time, more afraid. Marco reached into his jacket, slowly, carefully, aware that Isabella was watching his every movement, and pulled out a worn envelope. This is the last letter I received from your mother. It arrived 3 weeks after her death. She must have mailed it just before. He stopped, unable to finish. She wanted you to have it, but only when you were ready. Isabella stared at the envelope, her mother's handwriting on the front. For Isabella, when she's ready to know the truth. With trembling hands, Isabella took the letter. The paper was old, yellowed, but the ink was still clear. She unfolded it carefully and began to read. My dearest Isabella, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened, and I'm gone. I pray I'm wrong. I pray you'll never see these words. But I know the people I'm dealing with, and I know what happens to those who try to leave. By now you're probably 16, maybe 17, maybe older if Marco waited as I asked him to. Old enough to understand what I'm about to tell you. Your father is not who you think he is. The business, the money, the respect people show him. It all comes from a world that destroys everything it touches. I didn't see it at first. When I met him, I was young and foolish and thought love could conquer anything. But it can't conquer this. I've tried to protect you from the truth, tried to keep you innocent for as long as possible. But I know your father will shape you into something I never wanted you to become. He'll teach you to be hard, to be cold, to value power over people. Please, my precious daughter, don't let him succeed. You are not your father's daughter alone. You are mine too. You carry my blood, my heart, my dreams. And my dream for you is freedom. Real freedom. The freedom to choose your own path, to love without fear, to live without looking over your shoulder. I've made arrangements. Marco will tell you about them when the time is right. There's money, hidden where your father can't find it. There are people who will help you disappear if that's what you choose. There's a way out, Isabella. There's always a way out. But you have to want it. You have to be brave enough to take it. Remember Monte Giordano. Remember our language. Remember who you were before this life tried to change you. That little girl who laughed in the kitchen while we made sauce, she's still inside you. Don't let her die. Usango nun si kancia, maukori po shigiri. Blood doesn't change, but the heart can choose. Choose wisely, my love. Choose yourself. Choose life. Forever your mother. Maria Isabella's hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the letter. Tears streamed down her face, silent, relentless, unstoppable. 13 years. 13 years she'd believed the lie. 13 years she'd become exactly what her mother had feared. She knew. Isabella whispered. She knew what I would become. She hoped you wouldn't, Marco said gently. But she knew the risk. That's why she made plans. That's why she trusted me to wait, to watch, to find you when you were ready to hear this. Isabella looked up at him, her vision blurred with tears. The money she mentioned, is it real? Very real. She'd been setting aside money for years, small amounts that wouldn't be noticed. It's in a secure account, enough to start over anywhere in the world. And the people who would help me disappear? Ready when you are. Your mother thought of everything, Isabella. She gave you a way out. All you have to do is take it. For a moment, one beautiful, terrifying moment, Isabella allowed herself to imagine it. A different life, a normal life, waking up without fear, living without looking over her shoulder, being someone other than the woman everyone feared. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Her underboss. This late, it could only mean one thing. Trouble. I have to take this, she said, her voice rough with emotion. Marco nodded and stepped away to give her privacy. Isabella answered, What is it? The voice on the other end was tense. We have a situation. Victor has been talking to federal authorities. We have confirmation. He's preparing to testify. Isabella's blood ran cold. Victor was one of her most trusted lieutenants. If he was cooperating with the authorities, it meant everything could unravel. Where is he now? We're watching him, waiting for your orders. Isabella closed her eyes. This was the life. This was what it meant to be who she'd become. Constant vigilance, constant threats, constant decisions that weighed on her soul. Give me an hour, she said. I'll handle it. She ended the call and turned back to Marco, who was watching her with knowing eyes. You have to go, he said. It wasn't a question. I have a situation that requires immediate attention. There will always be situations, Isabella. Always emergencies. Always reasons why you can't walk away. That's how this life works. It never lets go unless you force it to. Isabella looked at the letter in her hand, then at Marco, then at the door that led back to her world of power and fear. My mother wanted me to know there's another way out, she said slowly. But she died before she could take it. What makes you think I'll be any different? Marco moved closer, his expression intense. Because you're tired. I can see it in your eyes. Your mother was tired too, but she waited too long. Don't make the same mistake. If I walk away, people will die, not just Victor, others. The power vacuum alone will cause... Is that your responsibility? Marco challenged. Or is it an excuse? A reason to stay in a life that's destroying you? Isabella's phone rang again. She ignored it. Your mother wanted you to choose yourself, Marco continued. Not power, not revenge, not duty to an organization built on fear. Yourself, your own life, your own future. I don't know if I can. Then decide tonight. Marco's voice was urgent now. Because tomorrow might be too late. Your mother learned that the hard way. Don't you make the same mistake. Isabella stood there, caught between two worlds, the life she'd built and the life she'd lost. The woman she'd become and the girl she used to be. Her phone rang a third time. She looked at it, then at Marco, then at her mother's letter. I need time to think. You don't have time, Marco said gently but firmly. Life doesn't give us time. It gives us moments. This is your moment, Isabella. What are you going to do with it? Isabella stood in the kitchen of Trattoria Bella Vista, her mother's letter clutched in one hand, her phone vibrating insistently in the other. The fluorescent lights hummed above her, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the rain hammering against the windows. 2 worlds, 2 lives, 1 impossible decision. She looked down at her phone. 5 missed calls now. Her organization was waiting. Victor's betrayal needed to be addressed. Decisions needed to be made. The machinery of power demanded constant attention, constant vigilance, constant sacrifice. But for the first time in 13 years, Isabella hesitated. "Tell me about the arrangements," she said quietly, still staring at her phone. "The money. The people who could help me disappear. Tell me everything." Marco moved to the counter, pulling out a folder that had been hidden beneath some kitchen supplies. He laid it out carefully, opening it to reveal documents, account numbers, contact information. Your mother opened a private account in Switzerland in 2010. She deposited small amounts over 2 years, never enough to raise suspicion. The total is approximately $2.3 million. Marco pointed to the account statement. The access codes are in her handwriting. Only you can withdraw it. Isabella's eyes widened. How did she manage to hide that much? She was clever. Small withdrawals from household accounts, savings from grocery money, bonuses she never reported. Your father never paid attention to those details. He trusted her to manage the domestic finances. Marco's voice carried both admiration and sadness. She sacrificed for years to build this safety net for you. He turned to another page. These are contacts, people who specialize in helping individuals start new lives. New identities, relocation assistance, legal protection. Your mother vetted each one personally. They're waiting for a call from you if you decide to use them. Isabella's phone buzzed again. She looked at the screen. A text from her underboss. Situation escalating. Need immediate guidance. Victor is preparing to move. Her jaw tightened. Even now, even in this moment of potential transformation, the old life was pulling at her with iron chains. If I walk away, Isabella said slowly, what happens to the organization? What happens to the people who depend on me? That's not your problem to solve, Marco said firmly. You didn't create this system, Isabella. You were born into it, shaped by it. But you don't owe it your entire life. People will get hurt. People are already getting hurt. That's the nature of this life. The question isn't whether you can prevent all suffering. You can't. The question is whether you're going to sacrifice your own chance at freedom to maintain a system that will eventually destroy you too. Isabella set her phone down on the counter, face down, as if by not seeing it she could block out its demands. My mother tried to leave, she whispered. And look what happened to her. Your mother tried to leave when you were young, when you were still dependent on her, when your father had all the power. Marco's voice was gentle but insistent. You're not that vulnerable 16-year-old girl anymore, Isabella. You have resources, you have knowledge, you have power of your own, and most importantly, you have a choice she never got to make. Isabella looked at the documents spread before her. Freedom, spelled out in bank statements and contact lists and carefully laid plans. Her mother's final gift, preserved for 13 years, waiting for this exact moment. How do I know I can trust these people? Isabella gestured to the contact list. You don't. Not completely. But your mother trusted them, and she was one of the most careful people I've ever known. Marco paused. Besides, you've been trusting people in your current life. How has that worked out? Victor was one of your most trusted lieutenants, and now he's cooperating with federal authorities. The words stung because they were true. Isabella's phone lit up again. Another call. She watched it ring, watched the screen flash with urgency, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel the automatic compulsion to answer. She let it ring, and ring, and ring, until finally it went silent. Tell me about Monte Giordano, Isabella said suddenly. Is it still the same? The village, the mountains, the church where my grandmother was married? Marco's expression softened. Mostly the same. A little older, a little quieter. Some young people have moved away. But the heart of it, the stone streets, the view of the valley, the way the bells sound in the evening, that hasn't changed. That will never change. Do you think... Isabella's voice wavered. Do you think I could go back there? Even after everything I've become? Your grandmother's house still stands. It's been maintained by distant cousins. They would welcome you. Marco smiled slightly. In Monte Giordano, you're not Isabella Romano, the businesswoman. You're Maria's daughter. That's all that matters. Isabella closed her eyes, and for a moment she could almost smell it. The herbs growing in terracotta pots, the fresh bread from the morning baking, the clean mountain air that tasted like freedom. I don't remember how to be that girl anymore, she admitted. The one who laughed in the kitchen, the one who wasn't afraid all the time, the one who believed the world could be good. Maybe you don't need to remember. Maybe you need to discover who you are now, without all of this. Marco gestured around them, but they both knew he meant more than just the kitchen. He meant the entire life she'd built, the entire identity she'd constructed. Isabella opened her eyes and looked at her mother's letter again. The words seemed to glow in the fluorescent light. Choose yourself. Choose life. If I do this, she said slowly, I can't come back. Ever. You understand that? I understand. Everyone I know, everyone in my current life, they'll think I'm dead or I ran away or I betrayed them. There's no middle ground here. No, Marco agreed. There isn't. That's what makes it a real choice. Isabella picked up her phone one last time. She stared at the screen, at all the missed calls and unread messages, at the digital representation of a life that had consumed her for 13 years. Then she made a decision. She opened her contacts and found Victor's number. She typed a message carefully. Victor, I know about your situation with the federal authorities. I'm not going to interfere. Do what you need to do. Consider this my final communication. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Then she composed another message, this one to her underboss. Emergency family situation. I'm stepping away immediately. Marcus is in charge effective now. Don't try to contact me. This is final. Send. One more message to her lawyer. Execute contingency plan Alpha. Transfer all assets as discussed, effective immediately. Send. Isabella looked at Marco. Contingency plan Alpha dissolves my active role in the organization and distributes leadership. It's something I set up years ago, just in case. I never thought I'd actually use it. Your mother would be proud, Marco said quietly. Isabella's hands were shaking as she powered down her phone completely. The screen went dark, and with it, the last connection to her old life. What do I do now? She asked, and her voice sounded small, vulnerable, nothing like the commanding tone people feared. Now? Marco reached for his jacket. Now we go. There's a car waiting 3 blocks away. One of your mother's contacts. He'll drive you to a safe location where you can meet with the identity specialist. By morning, Isabella Romano will begin to disappear, and someone new will begin to emerge. Just like that? Just like that. Marco held out his hand. Your mother spent years preparing for this moment. All the pieces are in place. You just have to walk through the door. Isabella looked at his outstretched hand, then at the folder of documents, then at her mother's letter. She thought about her penthouse in Manhattan, with its expensive furniture and its view of a city that never slept. She thought about the respect people showed her, respect born of fear. She thought about the power she wielded, the decisions she made, the life she'd built on foundations of sand. And then she thought about a little girl in a yellow kitchen in Monte Giordano, laughing while her mother taught her to make sauce, speaking a dialect that sounded like home, believing the world was good and beautiful and full of possibilities. Maybe that girl wasn't completely gone. Maybe she was just buried. Maybe she could be found again. Isabella reached out and took Marco's hand. Let's go, she said. They left through the back entrance of the restaurant, stepping into the rain-soaked alley. The November cold bit at Isabella's face, but she welcomed it. It felt like waking up, like being alive for the first time in years. The car was waiting exactly where Marco said it would be, a nondescript sedan with tinted windows. The driver nodded at them but didn't speak. This was all part of the plan her mother had laid out so carefully. Isabella slid into the back seat, Marco beside her. As the car pulled away from the curb, she looked back at Trattoria Bella Vista one final time, the modest restaurant where everything had changed, where her mother's 13-year plan had finally come to fruition. Where are we going? Isabella asked. Tonight? A safe house in Connecticut. Tomorrow? That's up to you. Europe? South America? Or perhaps... Marco smiled. Monte Giordano? Isabella felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it. Hope. Tell me about the house, she said quietly. My grandmother's house. What does it look like now? As the car drove through the rainy New York streets, Marco began to describe the village. The stone walls, the narrow streets, the view from the terrace where olive trees grew in ancient patterns. He spoke in the dialect, and Isabella found herself responding in kind, the words coming back to her slowly at first, then more naturally. They talked about recipes her grandmother used to make, about festivals in the village square, about the way the sunset looked from the mountain paths, about everything that had nothing to do with power or fear or the life Isabella was leaving behind. Somewhere around midnight, as the car crossed into Connecticut, Isabella fell asleep against Marco's shoulder, asleep free of nightmares, free of vigilance, free of the constant tension that had been her companion for 13 years. When she woke at dawn, they were pulling up to a small farmhouse surrounded by trees. The rain had stopped, and the early morning sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. Marco helped her out of the car. "This is where you'll meet with the specialist. They'll help you with documentation, identity, all the practical matters. It will take a few days, maybe a week. And then? And then you're free, Isabella. Truly free. Free to go anywhere, be anyone, live however you choose." Isabella stood in the driveway of that farmhouse, feeling the cold morning air on her face, hearing birds singing in the nearby trees, seeing the world as if for the first time. She reached into her jacket and pulled out the ceramic dove, her mother's dove, with its chipped wing and carefully repaired crack. She held it up to the morning light. "Usangu nun si cansia, ma ukori postigieri," she whispered. "Blood doesn't change, but the heart can choose." "Grazie, Mama," she said to the dove, to the memory, to the woman who had loved her enough to plan for this moment. "I finally understand." Marco placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "She's watching, you know. Somewhere, and she's proud of you." Isabella nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Together they walked toward the farmhouse, toward the beginning of something new, toward a future that Isabella Romano, or whoever she would become, was finally free to choose for herself. Behind them, the sun continued to rise, painting the world in colors of possibility and promise and hope. The past 13 years had been about survival, about power, about becoming someone her mother had feared she would become. But today, this beautiful, terrifying, liberating today, was about choice. And Isabella Romano chose herself. She chose life. She chose freedom. And somewhere, in a better place, Maria Romano smiled.